And welcome back to another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We're your co-hosts. That is RJ Schafer. I'm Jackson Caudell, coming to you on Wednesday, September 18th, a few days out from the big game this weekend. And I promised a special guest on Monday, and I've delivered. Like I always pull through with the special guests. Matt McGavic, deputy editor, publisher at Louisville Cardinals on SI. He did cover Georgia Tech once upon a time. So y'all might be familiar with Matt if you are, but Matt does a great job covering Louisville. But first of all, how you doing, Matt? Like vibes got to be good right now, right?
Oh yeah, the vibes are great. And yeah, I was only in Atlanta for like 4 months, so maybe people don't super know me. I mean, it was fun down there. I loved it.
Your work is so outstanding. Like somebody has to remember you doing it.
Thank you.
But yeah, we're coming to you 3 days before game time. We're going to break down this entire game. But as always, guys, we really appreciate the support. We're near 600 subscribers now. We're inching closer, and I know somebody out there wants to be that 600 subscriber. Like it's like your destiny. Like you were born to be the 600 subscriber. So let's get up to that. Also, like the video, hit that notification bell so whenever new content comes up. Watch it on podcast form. Just follow us along there. Give us 1-star review if you think that's what we deserve. 5-star review would be great. We love the feedback. We love getting you guys' opinions and hearing everything out and kind of building this community out. But so I remember you shooting me a text after the Florida State game and being like, "Are we going to get a ranked on ranked game in Louisville in a few weeks?" So I'm going to blame you for jinxing that. I guess my first question is I kind of want to talk about some maybe external factors surrounding the game that I've kind of thought about to the weekend. So this is Georgia Tech's 5th game of the season, and it's their quote unquote 3rd road game. Like I know Dublin was technically a home game, but you had to travel as far as you could possibly travel for a game in terms of college football. Mm-hmm. You had to take another long road trip to Syracuse, which did not go well. Only lost by 3, but as a whole, the game did not go well. Louisville, meanwhile, has been doing nothing pretty much. They've had about 2 weeks of preseason against Austin Peay and against Jacksonville State, then had a bye week. Do you buy into some of the? I guess a question I wanted to ask you. Georgia Tech has obviously been a little bit more battle tested. Even if you think Louisville may be more talented on paper, do you think that plays a factor into this weekend and the fact that Louisville has not had to play anybody yet while Georgia Tech's played? I know Florida State stinks right now, but they're better than any team Louisville's played. And they've played Syracuse.
They look pretty bad. I'm kidding. But, I mean, it really depends on what school of thought you can subscribe to. Because, I mean, while Georgia Tech is heading into their 5th game, so they've got a little bit more wear on the tires, but they've also had a lot more experience, and especially a lot more experience facing FBS opponents. Louisville's faced one, and they blew them out. The starters were pulled at halftime. Whereas with Georgia Tech, they've faced Florida State. They've faced Georgia State. They've gone to Syracuse and faced opposition there. So you can say that, yeah, Georgia Tech's more beat up, but they've also got more experience. Or do you subscribe to the notion that Louisville hasn't really had to do much of anything, and they're pretty well rested? They're going to be able to operate at a higher energy capacity, I guess, if you want to use that phrase, than Georgia Tech will. But in the same breath, they haven't played anyone. They played Austin Peay, which that game was over after the first quarter pretty much. And then outside of the second quarter against Jacksonville State, I mean, Louisville had that game under control. So they haven't really been faced with someone who can, withstand some punches for them. So I wouldn't blame anyone for being on either side of the fence. It really just depends on what viewpoint you choose to view it from.
Any thoughts on that, RJ?
I 100% agree, because when I was, thinking about doing the preview for this game, I had kind of thought about, it's very possible that Louisville can start off to a very slow start in this game because you haven't even played an opponent close to the level of Georgia Tech. Like, you haven't played a Power 4 team, let alone a Group of 5 team that's considered to be a contender. Like Jacksonville State is new to the FBS. You played FCS team in Austin Peay. So I just feel like there's going to be a lot of questions because we have an idea of what Louisville will look like. But then again, the game plan against a team like Georgia Tech, who went into Dublin and won, and this is their second team second game against a ranked team, there's a lot of different ways this game could go.
Yeah, I just think it, like all the points that Matt just pointed out, like you could, it's not even really twisting yourself into a pretzel trying to justify, like there's so many ways you can think about it and you're not really wrong. Like you can think about it like 5 different ways, like you said, and honestly, you're not wrong. I guess before we get into kind of the position breakdowns and everything, I kind of want to ask you, look, Austin P is bad. I was looking at them earlier. They just lost 45-17 to Central Arkansas. Jacksonville State's it's bad. And Jacksonville State's not very good. But you look at a lot of advanced metrics, whether it's SP Plus, ESPN's FPI, a lot of things like they love Louisville. Like they're over the moon about Louisville right now. I know, when I was asking you questions about the game, how does this Louisville team compare to last year? Like they made the ACC title game last year. How do they compare? And, are they better or, where are they better at? Just kind of give me your thoughts on that.
I think on paper, this Louisville team has the potential to be better than last year's team was. But like I told you, I don't think it's going to be necessarily reflected in the final win-loss column, or it might not. Maybe it will. Maybe they will look better. But like last year's schedule, I mean, outside of Notre Dame and Miami, at the time Miami wasn't very good, but like they didn't have like a very tough schedule. They had one of the softest schedules in the ACC, but they took full advantage of it. Whereas this year, they have to go to Notre Dame, which I mean, Notre Dame, regardless of how you feel about them, they're still a good team. They have to host Miami. They have to go to Clemson, and then they have to go to Kentucky at the end of the year, which damn near upset Georgia. So the schedule is a lot tougher this year. So while I think Louisville's team this year is better, I think the final win-loss at the end of the season might not be like it. It might not get to that double-digit win territory. It could, depending on how things break, but I would venture to say it probably won't. And I know a lot of these computer metrics, they think Louisville's like a top 15, close to a top 10 team. I'm not going to go that far yet just because they literally have not played anyone. But the main thing that you can say about this team, given their schedule up to this point, they haven't played with their food. I mean, we've seen teams like NC State and Oregon and a few other teams. Like Michigan had to go to the wire to beat Arkansas State. We haven't seen them, like, you haven't came away from these games thinking, oh, man, that was a little bit closer than it should have been. No, Louisville has taken the teams in front of them that they've been handed to them on their schedule, and they've pounded them into the ground. Now, that's probably doesn't amount to much because, they expected them to. But it goes back to my original point that they didn't treat this as something that they should roll over, and they went into it still with the mindset like this is a business decision here. We're going to go in there and just not beat around the bush and make sure we leave no doubt. So that's really the only takeaway you can have with this team up to this point. Now, whether that will carry on to power conference opponent, we don't know that yet, but we can have a good guess as to I think they should fare well against power conference foes, but no one truly knows at this point yet.
Any thoughts, RJ?
Yeah, and I think one point that Jack had brought up in a previous podcast is a sign of really good teams, really, really, really elite teams, is when they, really go out and beat up on inferior opponents, FCS opponents, low FBS opponents. You see that with the top teams all the time. Like if Georgia went out and played Central Arkansas, that might be an 80-point game. Like we know that to be fact. And the thing with Louisville is they're a different team than last year. Brought in a ton of new guys, lost a couple of guys that were the identity, especially of the offense. But they're still the same team. They still have a similar ideology when it comes to the offense. But I think that gives them room to be a lot better than they were last year. And I think that's fair to say. Even though they're doing the same things, they're improving on every single aspect of what they want to do, especially on offense.
So one last external factor question. Is this a look-ahead spot? Like are Louisville fans waiting to play Notre Dame and they're just kind of Georgia Tech's defense is bad, let's just coast against them and get ready for Notre Dame? Is that I'm not saying that's the sentiment, but it is interesting with Notre Dame on deck next week.
I think most Louisville fans recognize that Georgia Tech is going to present a little bit of a challenge, especially with how good that offense is. I mean, Haynes King looks like he's taken a massive step. He doesn't look like he's a walking turnover machine anymore. I mean, then he's got a whole bunch of weapons around him, and that offensive line looks really good. I think where Louisville fans start to think that Louisville should win and maybe even come close to cover is that defensive secondary doesn't look that great. I mean, it's early, but I watched that Syracuse game, and Kyle McCord's good, but some of those receivers were running wide open, and it was very reminiscent of what that secondary looked like last year. Now the front seven looks really good. They're getting punch at the point of attack. They're enforcing their will. That area of the field looks much better than it did last year. But that secondary, especially given what Jeff Brum likes to do on offense, I think that's where most Louisville fans feel like this is a game that Louisville should win and probably cover.
I will make the argument that the secondary is not quite that bad. It's the pass rush that's the main problem. But let's dig into some of the matchups. So, going into last year, I wasn't the biggest Jack Plummer fan. Like, I'm not being disrespectful, but I just felt like he was a good game manager. Like, Jeff Brum is –
well, whatever you've said, Louisville fans have said that plenty now since that season.
Probably. So how highly me and RJ think of Jeff Brum is RJ did coaches power rankings before the season, and he had Jeff Brum number 1 in the ACC, and I didn't really have a pushback on it. Like, if everything's equal, like Jeff Brum might be the best coach in the ACC. I know like Dabo's more accomplished, some others, but like if everything's equal, he is an excellent play caller. And I feel like no matter who the quarterback is, he's going to get good results. And I felt like that was the case last year. Now, I've always thought Tyler Shuck was talented, but like he is so injury riddled. Like, at Oregon, he looked good at Texas Tech last year, nearly beat Oregon, as a matter of fact, and then he just couldn't stay healthy. The results look pretty good so far, but is Tyler Shuck a difference maker at quarterback? Is he better than Jack Plummer? Is he just kind of a product of the system, so to speak?
Oh, Tyler Shuck is unequivocally an upgrade over Jack Plummer. The best way I heard Jack Plummer described as a quarterback in Jackson, you'll appreciate this being a baseball fan, is that he's a 0.0 WAR quarterback. He's not going to win you games, but he's not going to lose you games. But the weird thing with Plummer was that he had moments last year where he absolutely had his hand in losing some games. Like there were some throws that he made last season where you would expect from a freshman or like a second-year player. You wouldn't expect it from a sixth-year senior in college. Like some of these throws, you question the decision-making and the thought process going behind that. Transitioning to Shuck, one thing with Plummer is that it seemed like on a lot of his throws, like it seemed from the jump of that season that his confidence was rattled, especially in that second quarter against Georgia Tech where he looked like he couldn't get anything going. And they had to really get the run going and to really get back into that game and eventually win it. But with Tyler Shuck, his confidence is light years ahead of what Plummer's was, and that kind of you can see that in his play. Like he's got more of an arm than Plummer did, number one, but number two, he has the confidence in himself that he's not afraid to let it rip downfield. Now he kind of straddles that line between taking calculated risks and trying to make plays, so that's kind of a balancing act there. But the main difference between Shuck and Plummer is that Shuck is at least willing to try and take that risk, whereas Plummer seemed like he wanted to do anything but take a risk. And plus with Shuck, I mean, he's a dual threat quarterback. I mean, he's got ability with his legs. I mean, Plummer, he could scramble a little bit, but he was pretty statuesque last season, let's be honest. And he had the pocket presence of a toddler holding an iPad. I mean, it's just the best way I can put it.
So you're really pushing the boundaries of like he can move. Like I was about to say, like let's not push that too far now.
He moved. It just happened to be moving right into a sack. But with Tyler Shuck, he has the playmaking capability with his legs. But the big thing with that is that because of his injury history, Brom's not going to put him in that position at all. Like he wants him to try and be as much of a pocket passer as he can and only use his legs when he absolutely has to. Like in that last game versus Jack State, he used his legs to gain a couple of first downs, and all of us on the Louisville beat were like, oh, wow, we weren't expecting him to actually try and go for the first down against a team like this with his legs. Like, it's not that he can't. He very much can, But a point of emphasis over the offseason from Brom is that, yeah, we like him, we like what he can do, but we're going to try and we want to utilize his capabilities as a running quarterback at times. But we're absolutely not going to put him in harm's way if we don't have to.
Go ahead, RJ.
Yeah, and I think one of the main differences between Tyler Shuck over Jack Plummer is Plummer really worked off of the play action only. Like, even going back to the Georgia Tech game last year, when he dropped back, there were some problems, and I think that's why the game was as high scoring as it was. But Louisville absolutely dominated on the play action. Like, I think they were 11 of 13 on play action against Georgia Tech last year. A lot of deep plays, some of which we saw kind of in the Syracuse game. But I think Tyler Shuck brings something more. He can be a guy that is your traditional. I don't think he will play this role. I think, Jeff Brown really likes that play action, run the ball, get off of the play action. But I think he brings a pocket presence where you can just have him drop back. No play action, no anything. And he can be more than a serviceable quarterback. And I think that is a huge difference between Tyler Shuck over Jack Plummer from last year.
So one of the questions I had about Louisville going into the year was the running game. Was, obviously Jawar Jordan was good. Isaac Guerendo was good. You had Penny Boone for 3 weeks during the transfer portal season. So I was, you took Don Chaney from Miami. You had Duke Watson's a really talented freshman. It was funny because if you just go look at the stats and what's been done this year, you're thinking these guys are the lead. And I texted Matt about some of these guys yeah, that's pretty good for guys at the bottom of the depth chart. So how is this running game really shaped out? And they were really good at running the ball last year. Is the running game still the same? Is it worse, better? And kind of who's the guy to watch for on Saturday?
See, I kind of had a thought that out of all the positions on the roster, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and then over on defense, linebackers, secondary, whatnot. If you break down each unit and ask yourself the question, did they at least get better or break even? The only position that you could really say that about Louisville was their running back spot, because they lost Jawar Jordan to the league. They lost Isaac Guerendo to the league. They're one of just 2 teams in college last year that had 2 running backs drafted, them in Texas. So you think, okay, there's going to be a natural regression here just because of the talent they lost. And honestly, the running back spot has been probably one of the biggest surprises, because you look at the stats up to this point. Like you said, Jackson, the top 3 rushers are the guys who are the bottom 3 guys on the depth chart. Mo Turner is the starter, but Don Chaney from Miami is probably 1B. He's probably not going to see time in this game because he suffered a high ankle sprain against Jacksonville State. So he might play depending on the prognosis, but Jeff Brown doesn't really like to get into injury specifics, so we really don't know. But Mo Turner is probably going to be the starter. He's probably the best all-around back on the roster. He's got a good mix of speed, power, vision, pass-catching capabilities. He's probably the best pass catcher on the team in that running back room, and he's actually pretty good in pass pro, so that's why he's the starter. But someone to watch out for in this game other than him is absolutely Isaac Brown. And he's a true freshman, and through 2 games, he's already got 166 yards on the year, and the primary reason for that is his speed. Those South Florida boys are different with their speed, and we heard nothing but hype from the coaching staff all offseason, Isaac Brown is really good. Isaac Brown made some plays today. Isaac Brown is doing well in these drills, yada, yada, yada. And we saw it in spurts during open, because we only had a few open practices, so we didn't really see the full capabilities. And so when we see him in an actual game and see him just break off a 77-yard run in the first game, or break off chunk plays like it's nothing, then we're oh, okay, so this hype was not just hyperbole, which we probably should have seen coming, because Jeff Brom and everyone else on that staff is not one to just blow smoke up someone's ass. If they're really hyping up someone, then that's someone that you should circle this guy on the roster and be okay, watch out for this guy. And Isaac Brown was probably the guy who received the most hype over in fall camp and in the offseason, which is crazy because he's a true freshman.
RJ?
And I will say, you can factor in the strength of schedule, but you cannot diminish how good the Louisville rushing game has been this year. If I don't know if you guys are big fans of, PFF grades looking into that, but Louisville leads the nation in rushing grade, a 92.4, one of the highest I've ever seen. Granted, it's early in the season, but I think what Louisville brings to the rushing game is there's so many guys that can fill into that position, and we've seen that, like Kewan Brown, Isaac Brown. You obviously got Mo in at starter. There's so much that they can do out of that, and Braum has mentioned this. You can do so much with an offense if you can rely on your run game. They can rely on their run game, and I think that's what's going to open this game up. And I think that's where this game can really get out of hand. If Louisville wins by 2 scores, maybe even more, that's how it's going to happen.
Well, Jamari Thrash was really good last year, but he's gone. South Alabama transfer Colin Lacey was injured in the preseason, so I was kind of interested to see how the receivers would look. And it's almost like quarterback in a way. Like, I just expect Jeff Brom to figure it out with the receivers. Like, you might not have like a first-round pick maybe, but you're going to have a talented skill group. And obviously, I think Ja'Cory Brooks, he looks pretty good. I know he was targeted pretty heavily in those first couple games. Is he kind of the number one receiver right now? And kind of what are your thoughts on the receiver group overall?
So with the receiving core as a whole, it's kind of hard to get a good gauge on them. We think they should be pretty good, but because of the competition faced, they haven't really had to open up the playbook hardly at all. I think in the last game, Shuck only attempted 10 or 11 passes that went 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. Like, they didn't really have to do much in those games to win. So while we think the wide receiving core should be good, we don't have super concrete, tangible proof that they're going to be. But I mean, for now, I mean, you brought up a good point. I mean, something I noticed in fall camp was that even while Lacey was still there, even before he got hurt, because he's got a broken collarbone, but from what I hear, he'll be back sooner rather than later. He's not going to play this weekend, obviously, but he will be back at some point. But even before that, I noticed that Shuck was starting to develop a lot of chemistry and a lot of reps and just a repertoire in general with Brooks. And that's something, if you're a Louisville fan, it's great to see that, because he's a former 5-star. He played his first 3 seasons at Alabama under Nick Saban, which you can do worse. And but the only reason he ended up entering the portal was because last season he was hurt. And at Alabama, they turn out 5-stars like it's nothing. Like, it's just next man up. And then he just got kind of phased out of the rotation. So that's the only reason he left. It's not because of diminished skill or wasn't living up to the hype. Like, this is a guy, as a true freshman, who he was the reason that Bama won the Iron Bowl in 21 and had to come from behind. He had that touchdown in the final minute, and he had a touchdown as a true freshman in the CFP semifinal against Cincinnati. Like, he's had big-time moments on big-time stages early on in his career. And so far, and we didn't see a lot of it in spring because he was kind of dealing with a shoulder issue. But now, after he got fully healthy and we got to see him in fall camp that more so resembled that former 5-star form. And through the first 2 games of the season, again, competition, so I get it. But through the first 2 games of the season, he looks like he is going to be the guy who Brom is going to dial up plays for. Because we've seen in the past that Brom has heavily subscribed to the feed the studs mentality, whether or not that's – sorry, my dog is really doing this right now.
We're a pro dog podcast, or a pro, like, just overall dog. Like, unless it's a bulldog, like, I think you're good here.
Right. But no, whether it be David Bell or now I'm blanking at the former Iowa walk-on that joined Purdue.
Charlie Jones.
Charlie Jones, yes. If you're like the 1A guy in the wide receiver room, he's going to get you the ball, and that happens to be Ja'Cory Brooks. Really?
See, this is great content.
This is pristine entertainment.
If you're not subscribed to this podcast, I suggest you hit that button right now. If you don't get
Oh my God. Are you finished? Are you done digging into the couch? Hey, stop. Yeah. We'll do it live.
Yeah, exactly. RJ, any thoughts on Louisville receivers, or just any thoughts on just kind of the skill groups overall?
See, I don't know how I follow that.
Yeah, that's a tough ask, but so I guess I won't say this is the weakness, but I guess I got the sense from talking to you earlier this week. Overall, I think you're pretty high on everything. I think the offensive line was maybe where you were not like it wasn't bad, but it's like, okay, is this the weakness of the offense you would say this year so far?
By default, and that's only because like the other positions on the offense have taken like a pretty notable step forward or look good. If there's any other position that could be weakness, it might be tight end. But I mean, so far, the tight end spot looks light years better than it did last season. But that's only because Louisville had no viable pass catching options at tight end last year because of what they inherited from the Scott Sutherfield era. But I mean, so far, tight end looks fine. It looks pretty good. It's not going to be like what it was at Purdue when you had like guys like Payne Durham, or even at WKU when Brown had Tyler Higbee and a couple other guys. But it looks passing. The only criticism that I've had of the offense so far is that the offensive line in terms of pass pro has looked fine, but the run blocking has been a little bit suspect, I think. And I noted this on my podcast a couple times from the Pink Seats, how the offensive line's struggles in run blocking were kind of masked by the fact that they had 2 running back draft picks. So, like, and when you look at the advanced metrics on PFF, Louisville's run blocking wasn't that great. So now when you're going to a running back room that's going to be pretty much running back by committee and who you don't really have like a clear-cut NFL draft pick right now, I think that's probably going to get exposed a little bit more when they face power conference competition. I mean, they're going to run hog wild against Jack State and Austin Peay for sure. But when it comes time to like face ACC competition, I wouldn't be shocked if Louisville has maybe some struggles over the first quarter or two running the ball just because of that increase in competition and because they don't have a tried and true NFL draft pick on their roster at running back right now.
Okay. Any thoughts, RJ?
Yeah. And I think, excuse me, I think offensive line is the position that is probably open to the most change throughout the year. I don't know. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, and especially because they feel really good about their defensive line depth right now. So if it's like a couple games of the season and one guy on the line's not doing too hot, they're not afraid to put someone else in there. I mean, their starter at right guard got hurt midway through the season, and he's still in the process of coming back. I mean, he's healthy now, but he's not starting now because the guy who took his place at the end of the year has looked better so far to start the season. So they've shown in the past that if you're struggling a little bit, next man up.
Yeah.
Well, any thoughts from either of you on anything we missed on offense, or y'all ready to go to the other side of the ball?
Let's go to the other side, baby.
So, I mean, I think the thing that pops out the most when you look at just – even if you're just box score scouting, Louisville has really gotten after the quarterback. Now, I guess playing devil's advocate a little bit here, they do have 9 sacks in 2 games, and I counted 7 of them against Austin Peay. But I thought this was a strength going into the year. So this wasn't like I had questions again for Louisville, and then all of their answer, they sacked Austin Peay's quarterback 7 times. But they have really good pass rushers, and I kind of like – a little bit off topic here, but if they were able to keep Tyler Barron from going to Miami, like he has been off to a torrid start. Like I hate.
I know, God, I hate seeing him doing so well.
This would be the best pass rushing group in the ACC. I'd probably give that edge to Miami right now, but that thought occurred to me this week, so I thought I'd mention it when Matt was here. So
I know.
But the pass rush has been fantastic, and I asked Brent Key about it yesterday, and he mentioned like 19 tackles for loss, 9 sacks in 2 games. So like now Georgia Tech has not given up any sacks so far this year. Like the offensive line has been good in that. Would you say that's the strength of the defense so far?
I would, and it's saying something because like on this defense, I mean Louisville's probably going to be carried by their the way that I've explained to people is that Louisville's defense is fantastic, and I can't really imagine a realm in which their defense falls off. So their ceiling is going to be determined more so by their offense, because I can't see this defense like finishing outside the top 25 in some of the major metrics because they're that good. And on defensive line, not only do they have really good starting caliber players, they've got pretty good depth, a fantastic 2 deep across the board. I mean, for starters, you've got an All-American and edge rusher in Ashton Gelati, who I think had 11 sacks last season, and he's off to a pretty solid start. And then in the middle of the line, you've got a couple of really good pickups in Thor Griffith from Harvard and Jordan Grab from FIU. But some other stalwarts who've been with Louisville around for a long time, they've also gotten off to good starts in Jared Dawson and Des Tell. They've been kind of underrated components of the D-line for literal years now, but they've had good starts. And then on the other edge spot opposite of Gelati, Tramel Logan, I mean, he only arrived halfway through fall camp because of some eligibility issues or like trying to get the paperwork ironed out. And he has exploded to start the year. And this is a guy who's only able to play in 2 of the 4 weeks of fall camp, and he's done well. And behind those guys on the edges, there's Richard Kinley from Middle Tennessee, Miles Jernigan from Cal, and there's a few other guys who've done really well. And actually, I forgot to mention this, the biggest surprise for me on that defensive line so far is Renee Conga, who came over from Rutgers. And when he first committed in the spring, I look at his statistical profile based on his time at Rutgers, and I'm like, this guy's a take? Why? And then I see in fall camp, not only is he doing well, he's running with the starters day 1 fall camp. And I'm thinking, this is interesting. And it only took me a couple plays to see why. Like he's done very well. Now it's not going to show up a lot on the box score. I mean, to his name, he's only got 3 tackles so far. But if you scout him and watch the games, like he's done really well. And he's kind of interchangeable, but he plays more so on the interior, and he can play both true nose and DT. But whatever spot he's played on the line, he's done a very good job at being the guy that eats up blocks and allows other guys on the line to make plays.
And I think defensive line, and I guess you could say this for the defensive unit in general, that's where the most stars are in this game. Like, you talk about Georgia Tech offense, I'd say there's 2 stars. I think there's Jamal Haynes. I think there's Haynes King. Louisville defense, I think there's plenty. And I think Ashton Gelati, I think he's the best player on the field. And I think Georgia Tech will have to try to – I guess there's no way to avoid a defensive line in total, but try to minimize the impact of Gelati, try to minimize the impact of these starters, because that unit – to me, as a Georgia Tech fan, is probably the most scary unit that they'll play until they go out and play Miami. Besides that, I think Louisville has the second best pass rush in the ACC, and I think that's going to be another place, like we talked about the rushing offense for Louisville. I think that's another place where Louisville's going to start to ask Georgia Tech some questions, and if they don't answer, that's where this game could get bad.
Yeah. And honestly, it's going to answer some questions for Louisville too, because I mean they've steamrolled their first 2 competition, but Georgia Tech, based on their statistical profile so far, has one of the best offensive lines in the ACC. Yeah. So are they as good as their stats suggest they are, or is it just a bunch of stat padding? So it answers the question for Louisville too.
Yeah. Well, hey, I got to mention, Pete Thamel had Florida State's best defensive line in the country, so Georgia Tech's already blocked them. So. Ashton Gelati, Marvin Jones Jr., it's apples and oranges here, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I guess let's talk about, just wrap up the defense. Like, there's a couple guys in the other positions. Like, I think Stanquan Clark is fantastic. I've loved him ever since a recruit. Like, I thought he was an under-the-radar guy. Quincy Riley's a really good player in the secondary. Is there – I know I asked you this earlier, but is there a kind of under the radar guy you want to talk about, and also just kind of talk about what's your biggest worry on defense? I know you think very, very highly of the defense, but I guess what would be your worry if you had one?
I think if there is a worry, it's probably would be Louisville's capabilities when it comes to defending a dual threat quarterback, because they faced one in Jacksonville and against Jacksonville State and Tyler Huff. And Tyler Huff had a number of big plays in the second quarter and had a few in the third quarter before Louisville made some adjustments. But just going back and watching some of the film, some of the boundary corners and some of the inside linebackers didn't do a really great job at staying disciplined. And there was some ankle biting. There was some poor tackling angles. There was some stuff like that. And when Tyler Huff was able to break up some big runs and whatnot, I mean, on Tyler Huff's 1 touchdown run, that happened because 2 guys read the same guy, and it left him completely unblocked to run in for an easy, I think, 15-yard touchdown. So they've definitely have some things to clean up in that regard. But fortunately for them, they've had 2 weeks to do it because they're coming out of a bye week. But if there's anything I would be concerned about with this defense is how will they deal with a quarterback who can run and who is one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC when it comes to running in Haynes King. Because there's who else in the ACC besides maybe Cam Ward is as good when you take into account both their capabilities with their arm and their legs. There's not a lot. Maybe Kyron Jones too.
Yeah. I'm a little off that right now. But anything you want to add there, RJ?
Yeah, I think it's important to also just look at how the Georgia Tech offense is in general. Like, it's kind of an option heavy. You know, they do like to run the ball with Haynes King. They do like to run the ball with Jamal Haynes. Looking at last year, that's where Georgia Tech found success. Jamal Haynes had an insanely good game. Haynes King was really good at running the ball. I do agree. I think that's where that realm of running the ball is where Louisville could struggle, because that's what we saw last year. Louisville obviously came away with the win, but allowed 34 points to a Georgia Tech team, you know, that was almost purely running the ball in that game. And I think that's where you could have worries, but I do think this Louisville defense is strong, and I think that's why it's going to be a close game, and I don't necessarily think it's going to be a very high-scoring game.
So a couple more things before we get you out of here. Do you have something else, RJ?
That's all I had.
Okay. So if Louisville wins this game and win, cover, whatever, what do you think is going to be the main reason why? Like, if they go out there, win, whether they cover or not, what do you think is going to be the main reason they do it?
I think the main reason they do this is they are able to bottle up the run like we think they should be able to. Because this Georgia Tech offense, I mean, it's like you said, RJ, it's one that's like pretty option RPO heavy. There's not a ton of downfield shots. Like, a lot of their passing yardage comes on run after catch. So this is going to be the Louisville front seven is going to have to do a lot of reading and reacting instead of just going. They're going to have to sit back for that extra half second to watch where the ball is actually going to go. And a lot of that is predicated on what the running back, what Haynes King is going to decide with the running back. And if they can kind of do a good job at holding Jamal Haynes, which it's a tall task because he's coming off a 1,000-yard season. But if they can do that and even kind of limit what Haynes King can do as a runner and force Georgia Tech to rely more so on their passing game, which up to this point doesn't seem to be super developed beyond 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. I think that would be the biggest reason as to why Louisville could come away with the win.
Okay, let me turn that question around, though. If Louisville gets upset this Saturday, what is the reason behind that?
I would say it would be because the wide receiver core isn't as good as we thought it was going to be. Just because on paper, this is a receiving core. This should be better than what it was last year because it was pretty much just Jamari Thrash and company. And right now they're missing Colin Lacey, who is the best player on the team, not named Ashton Gelati or Quincy Riley. So I could see a situation where Georgia Tech can kind of key on Ja'Cory Brooks and limit what he can do. And if the guys behind him, like a Chris Bell or a Jaden Thompson or a Jimmy Callaway or any one of those guys, if those guys can't step up, if, Georgia Tech's defense game plans for an all-game double team on Brooks, then that's probably the biggest way I can see Georgia Tech coming out of L&N Stadium with a win.
All right, well, the very, very last thing, I don't know if you're a predictions guy, but we'll ask you for one. You don't have to give it, but if you want to give one, what do you think happens on Saturday?
I watched that Syracuse game, and I get that Kyle McCord is good, and Syracuse has weapons. But I could not shake the feeling of watching some of those guys just run wide open. And if Louisville has the weapons at receiver and at tight end like we think they should, I think Louisville comes out with a 41-28 win. I think they barely cover.
Barely cover, but cover's a cover. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. I will be at the game on Saturday, so I will be seeing you this weekend. And so if he's wrong, I will let him know about it for sure. But we really appreciate you, Matt. And look, if Georgia Tech loses this weekend, this is probably out the door. But if I've told every guest we've had on here so far, at least ACC wise, if for some reason we got an ACC title game rematch, you're more than welcome to come back on. Like, it's an open invite. I'm just saying.
I'll come. I'll accept the invite for sure.
Absolutely. College football playoff berth on the line, man. Like, you got to be here. But we really appreciate it, Matt. Thank you for taking your time out. I know you're a busy guy, and we look forward to probably seeing you maybe during basketball season. Maybe that's when we see you again.
Hopefully. Are you going to make some trips up here?
We'll see. I'll definitely be here this weekend.
We don't know yet.
TBD on the rest.
Right, yeah. But it'll be a fun time.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate it, Matt. Thank you. So I guess we got to talk about, from a Georgia Tech perspective, of course, we really appreciated the insight into Louisville because, like, it really is a little bit of a question, how good Louisville is and some of the personnel questions. Because, they brought in a lot through the transfer portal, and, it can be tough to decipher because it's just kind of crazy to think Georgia Tech's, like, on their fifth game, and Louisville's already had a bye week, basically three. Three preseason weeks almost, like I guess I could say. So I guess let's kind of talk about it, on the both sides of the ball. We don't have to nail it like position by position, but like kind of talk about, the offense versus the defense. And, I'll share a couple of graphs right here, just kind of seeing how they match up, advanced analytically and everything like that. So let me get my technology squared away here. But so as you can see, like, so shout out to College Football Insiders. They do a really good job with these graphs and kind of illustrate to you what teams have been good at so far this season. Now, these are opponent adjusted. So I do want to make that clear. Like, it's not like Louisville that they're not taking into account the teams that Louisville's played. That is a factor in this. So they do expect this game to be closer than the 10-point margin. They also think the game will go under. So they have Louisville winning, if you want to round up, say 30-25, which again does cover the spread. You look at on the right side for Louisville, if you want to look at, the Georgia Tech offense versus the Louisville defense, obviously EPA per rush, expected points added, like Georgia Tech, that's been really good. I think the thing to point out is Georgia Tech's passing game has been super efficient this year. I think me and you have both mentioned that, they don't take a ton of just 50-yard shots down the field all the time. They do have a lot of run after the catch. Like Malik Rutherford is awesome after the catch. Eric Singleton is kind of the deep threat. Then, Chase Lane has been kind of the intermediate guy that Haynes King looks for on third down. Now, Chase Lane was really explosive in this game last year. I do want to point out, like, he had a big catch and run for a touchdown. But I do want to point out that the EPA drop back for Georgia Tech's offense, and it is lower. Like, that's kind of one of the lower points for Louisville's defense. That EPA allowed per drop back. Like, they're only 66th. So I do think that can show you that, hey, maybe Georgia Tech can have some success against the secondary. Now, everything else is pretty good. Like early downs and third down and fourth down success, like Louisville's defense is very good at. I guess what do you think are going to be the key matchups? Because I think one thing I'm really interested in is the run game. Because, we regard Georgia Tech as having a really strong running game, and I still think that that's true. I will say the last time they faced a Power 4 opponent, they got punched in the mouth. We talked about the Syracuse game plenty. I'm not trying to relitigate that whole thing. But one of the things, I took from that game was just, Syracuse looked very physical, and I think it surprised Georgia Tech a little bit. Like they looked a little caught off guard by how physical Syracuse was and how fired up they were. I don't think that's going to happen again. But they couldn't run the ball outside of some Haynes King design runs. I mean, Jamal Haynes did have the touchdown run at the end, but it was mostly through Haynes King. The rest of the games this year, they've been pretty good on the ground. Jamal Haynes is he didn't get a lot of carries last week, but he only had 30 yards. Obviously, guys like Trelane Maddox, Anthony Carey, Chad Alexander can play a factor here. But I do want to see how they can come out and run the ball because I agree with Matt. Like, I think it goes under the radar how good Louisville's defense is. Like, they're pretty solid at every level. But I guess what's your take on kind of the matchup you're looking for?
I think this is the matchup where I don't know if you could say that Georgia Tech has an advantage per se because of how good Louisville's defense is. But I think this is where Georgia Tech has the most opportunity, because I feel like the offense is the better unit out of offense and defense. I think the run game and the pass game are both improved from last year. We've seen kind of a rough road from Jamal Haynes, but he's been banged up. Obviously, last week you play an opponent where you have a lot of backup guys in. I think Trey Maddox looked really good, and I think Chad Alexander is a guy who's, sneakily putting himself into that second running back role. I know we've talked about backup running back so much on this podcast, like people got to get tired of it, but I think you do have a lot of depth, and I think you're gonna have to, I guess, have some trickery, like we've seen in some ACC games. The reason why some teams upset a ranked team is you throw some things at them that you haven't put on film this year. And I think Buster Faulkner has done a great job of that in the past. And maybe that's something we see against Louisville this week.
Yeah, I'm pretty anxious to see that. This is also going to be the best pass rush they face. So, I made some jokes about Florida State, but, they're probably the best pass rush they face. And Florida State's been kind of crap at that, although they do have talent. So I'm anxious to see that. But I agree. I think they're going to empty the playbook out this weekend because, I know people might, laugh off, Georgia Tech being a part of the ACC race. But, going into this, if you lose this game, you're more than likely on the outside looking in. You got to be honest. You've already got a loss to Syracuse. This will be your second ACC loss. And Louisville's 2 games up on you, and they own the tiebreaker. And you've still got some tough games ahead. So I do think you need to empty the playbook and let it all out on the field. And Brent Key talked about it yesterday when I asked him about the defense. He's like, nothing is going to be left in Atlanta. So then we'll see about that. But I do think, they're going to have to get creative in some ways and take some shots. And we pointed out how important it was. We thought Haynes King not carried the ball last week. I think you're going to see a lot more designed runs this week. I do think Louisville has struggled to contain mobile quarterbacks in the past. I'm not saying that Haynes King's going to run for 180 yards or he's Michael Vick, but I do think he can pose, problems to Louisville's defense. But I definitely think, we say it almost every game, just the battle in the trenches is just going to be so key. Being able to run the ball and being able to protect Haynes King is just going to be paramount, because if they can't run the ball and, you get down, they were able to come back a little bit against Syracuse, but this defense is way better and more talented than Syracuse's, and you don't want to get to a point where Haynes King has got to drop back and try to win the game against the talented pass rush and let guys like Gelati just come off the edge and just, attack the pass rusher and not make him think a little bit, because I do think that's a component to him as well, because Buster Faulkner does a really good job of, making guys on the defense think, whether it's motions, whether it's shifts, any of that type of thing, is, you're putting them – you're trying to put them in a bad position. If they're able to just tee off on you and come after the quarterback, that changes the complexity of the whole thing. So I do think being able to do that is just going to be super key. And this is going to be a tough matchup. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be a tough matchup for the offense. But, I have a good level of trust in Georgia Tech's offense. They're not perfect all the time, but, they do generally get the job done. I know the Syracuse game wasn't great, but they did find some things they were successful at in that game. But anything else about the offense, you want to kind of flip it to the other side of the ball and what's a really important matchup?
Yeah, I want to touch on one quick thing that Matt had mentioned earlier. Georgia Tech really hasn't thrown the ball downfield a lot last year. We kind of saw that last year. We saw that a little bit against VMI. Obviously, Haynes King did not play for that whole game. Maybe this is the game where we start to see some downfield throws. But then again, Georgia Tech could also go with the notion of Haynes King and Jamal Haynes are the 2 best rushers on this offense. Maybe we let them tee away. There's a lot of things they can do, and I think that is the place for this game where there is the most mystery, where you don't really know what Georgia Tech is going to do. I guess you could say that they have concepts of a plan on offense. You don't know what's really going to happen, but this could be the Eric Singleton game. That's one thing I want people to realize. If Eric Singleton has a big game, I think that's one way how Georgia Tech wins.
Yep. You ready to talk about defense?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about the defense. So that red down there you see is Georgia Tech's defense, and in some key areas, like there's some blue in there. There's some blue in there, especially EPA per rush allowed. Georgia Tech's run defense is better. It's not like elite, but it is a lot better. The other stuff is the problem. And it is stuff we've talked about since the preseason. And it's, we'll see, if they're able to make some quick corrections from the Syracuse game or not. Like this is, so I don't know if this is a hot take, and I hope I don't get flamed for it, but I actually think Syracuse's skill position and quarterback are better than Louisville's. And I think that I'm talking more speaking highly of Syracuse. I'm not at all trying to put Louisville down or anything. Like this is more of a compliment towards Syracuse because they were a lot better than I thought. And I already thought they were pretty good. Like I think Kyle McCord's a good quarterback. I would prefer him to Tyler Shuck, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't think Shuck's a bad quarterback by any means. I also think Aronde Gadsden and Trevor Pena are very, very good, and I think they would be the best weapons on Louisville. So I do want to point that out. Is I do think Syracuse in some ways has better personnel than Louisville does, because I'm still interested to see how Louisville's receivers are, because Colin Lacey is really, really good. Like, go check that kid out at South Alabama last year. Like, dude put up monster numbers, and I think he would have been a really key part of this offense. And it sounds like he's going to be at some point soon. But I think not having him for this game is a big deal. And, almost like the backup running back thing, like people probably get exhausted a little bit of talking about the pass rush, but it's just 3 of the 5 sacks that Georgia Tech has this year are against VMI. So, you kind of, like, I'm not going to throw it out, but it's just, when over half your sacks are against a very, very inferior team, it hasn't been good this year. Like they did not affect Kyle McCord in the least little bit. Like, he was just on rhythm, on time, and everything. And maybe some of that is they just threw some stuff at Tech that they weren't ready for. I think that is a possibility because, again, Syracuse has a new coordinator, new personnel, and everything. I think there's at least a familiarity with Jeff Brom's system and the things that he does. Now, again, they have a lot of new players, but I at least think there is a little bit of familiarity there. But affecting the quarterback and just breaking up the timing is just going to be critical. Like, it can't be understated how critical it is. And maybe you see Tyler Santucci bring blitzers. Maybe they can win with the front four. Like, I think Louisville's offensive line is solid. I do think it is a little bit of a question mark, I'll be honest. But I don't know if Georgia Tech's a team that's going to exploit it. Like, I feel like this is the biggest mismatch in the game and the one I'm worried about because, again, Jeff Brom can coach offense as good as anybody in the country. And, whatever your opinion of Shuck, even if you don't think he's a superstar quarterback or even just a very good quarterback, like when you're able to scheme things open and don't have to worry about a pass rush, like it can make things easy for you. What are your thoughts on that?
And again, I'll bring up this point that I brought up earlier. Louisville is so good, and they have been for such a long time, off of the play action. I think that's Georgia Tech's biggest weakness on defense, and I think we've seen that not necessarily this year, but we saw that a lot last year. We kind of saw that in the Syracuse game where, you kind of see, some undisciplined plays in play action. You see safeties crashing down when they shouldn't. You see a lot of plays, like obviously Aronde Gadsden got open. Kyle Eifert was supposed to be on that play, bid on the play action. That is going to be something Georgia Tech needs to address. Regardless of whether or not they win this game, I think that's been one of the biggest problems for the defense. That to me is where I worry the most. That's the big worry point. But I think Louisville also likes to build an identity around being a running team. I think Georgia Tech has been well improved up front, I guess you could say, in the linebackers. I'd say the front seven has been a lot better in the run defense because, this time last year, we were talking about how Georgia Tech had one of the worst run defenses in the ACC. That's not the case this year. I think they've done a good job of limiting the run. It's just being able to defend the run and being able to defend the play action is going to be absolutely paramount, and I cannot stress it enough, really.
Yeah, I mean it's part of the game that scares me the most. And I think you look down here. Louisville is first and third and fourth down success rate this year. Georgia Tech is 101st in third and fourth down success rate allowed. That was I think pretty evident in the Syracuse game is they had a hard time getting off the field on third down. Of course, they gave up a couple of fourth down conversions, one big one in the second half. So just having early down success to force third and longs. Although the thing is, I say that, and that last play of the real play of the game against Syracuse, when they declined the penalty, go 3rd and 10, hope to get a stop, and they still couldn't. So, but having early down success and just being able to get off the field, like they've got to find a way to get off the field. That has been where we've seen Santucci blitz a little bit. I can see him definitely doing that because I think he took too long to try to do that. Because when they did a couple of drives in the second half where they did kind of get McCord off his spot a little bit, they were bringing pressure. So I do expect that to possibly be part of the game plan. But yeah, this is the part of the game that worries me the most because, like I said, I don't think the secondary is that bad talent-wise. Like Warren Burrell has really good grades on PFF. I think Amari Harvey has taken a step, and I think the safeties are solid. Not like spectacular, but I think they're solid. I think you've got to find a way to affect the quarterback. You have to do that, and they haven't done that so far this season. And didn't really matter against Florida State because their passing attack stinks. Georgia State doesn't have a great passing attack, but Syracuse did, and like Kyle McCord looked like he had like 300 yards in the first half and finished nearly like he didn't like he was pretty perfect. So. Again, I think Kyle McCord and some of the Syracuse players are better than some of the guys on Louisville, and again, no disrespect towards Louisville, but still, if you can't get pressure on the quarterback, like Jeff Brom's just going to scheme it open, and that's going to be they're fifth in the nation in offensive success rate, third in rush, 19th in drop back. That's pretty good. Georgia Tech, on the other hand, they're actually 42nd in rushing success rate allowed, but they're 112th in drop back success rate allowed. Just not good. It's just not good enough. And look, it's really been the only glaring weakness. Again, Georgia Tech has not been elite in a ton of categories, but the only one they've been really bad in is the passing defense, and that's a big worry for me. But we'll see what can happen. So, what are 3 keys to victory? We think that. What are 3 things that Georgia Tech has to do? I'll let you go first. If they're going to pull this upset off, what are 3 things that got to happen on Saturday?
I think first things first, you have to see a big game from Jamal Haynes. This run game is going to be paramount, especially on offense. Jamal Haynes has kind of had a couple on and off weeks. He's been a little bit banged up. I think this is the game where you have to see him go. He has to get I'd argue has to get around 20 carries, and you have to see a significant 100-yard game, a couple of touchdowns. I think he's going to be a huge part of the offense. The other 2 keys, one thing I'm hammering down on because I think this is so important, is defending the play action on defense. It's so important. That's been Louisville's identity for the past couple of years. And it's going to continue to be Louisville's identity until somebody can stop it. If Georgia Tech doesn't stop it, that's going to be huge. And the one other thing I want to throw out there, this is kind of more of a miscellaneous. They don't have to do this, but I think if they want to win, want to surprise people, this is how you're going to have to do it. You have to surprise the Louisville defense. Again, we've said they're going to clear out the playbook. You really have to clear out the playbook. Find plays that you have not ran at all under Buster Faulkner. New things. Find ways to get Malik Rutherford open. Find ways to get Eric Singleton open in space, even Jamal Haynes. There's a lot of things Georgia Tech can do, and I think they've been very conservative. Kind of really the reason they lost the Syracuse game. I don't think they pulled out all the tricks out of the hat that they had, and I think they took Syracuse a little bit too light. Now it's time to tune up. This is one of your big games. You're going to play a lot of big opponents this year. Obviously, Notre Dame, Miami coming later. But if you want to give yourself a shot at the ACC title game, it starts now. I don't think you're going to get to the ACC title game with 2 losses. No, just being frank.
I said it before the season. And look, I I had Georgia Tech finishing 7-5, and truthfully, I had them starting 4-0, and then this was preseason. This was a loss for me. But I agree with you for pretty much everything. Look, I think the running game is absolutely huge. Like I don't think they can win this game if they don't run the ball well. I'm not saying they have to have 300 yards rushing, although that'd be nice. But they have to find some semblance of running the ball. They cannot have a repeated Syracuse game. I'll say it until my face turns blue. They got to get pressure on the quarterback. They have to affect the quarterback. I know going against these offenses and this good of a quarterback, I think, some things are going to happen. You're not going to get stops 100% of the time, but it just can't look like it did a couple weeks ago. Like they have to be better than they were a couple weeks ago. And I think forcing turnovers, it's just not something we've seen, really. Like Amari Harvey did fantastic last week, forcing the fumble against VMI. But they haven't really done that a whole lot this year. And I think I think it's just going to, give yourself extra possessions. You're a talented offense. And I think that's what it's going to take. Like they're going to have to force a few turnovers to stay in this game. And then, you're right. Like this is a really big game for Georgia Tech because, they almost got in there with, 5-3 last year going in ACC play. They finished 5-3, but it was the loss to Louisville where you could have been in the ACC title game again. They'd have been in a 3-way tie with Louisville and NC State. But, blowing that lead, last year really, really cost you in the end. And, if you want to stay in this thing, got to win this game. Like you have to win this game. And then, you head into your bye week with a lot of momentum and some good feeling. And, that would be huge for the program. It doesn't mean the sky's falling if they lose, but, just a lot of, bigger goals and aspirations can be achieved if you win this game. So those would be my 3 keys. All right, so we got to predict the game to wrap it up here. Look, I know y'all might be mad at me for this, but I'm going to pick Louisville. I just think at the end of the day, the matchup between the passing game for Louisville and the passing defense for Georgia Tech is just too big a gap to overcome. I just think Louisville is at least shored up in other areas where they'll be able to limit Georgia Tech's offense a little bit. I think it will be tough to run on them very consistently. But I'm not confident in it. I don't, if you'd asked me right after the Syracuse game, just caught up in the emotion of it, I'd have said, well, Louisville can throw the ball, so they're going to win by 30 points. I've come off that. Like, I don't think it's going to be a blowout because there are some things working in Georgia Tech's favor. Brent Key is 5-0 against ranked teams in the ACC. 4 of those wins, by the way, are on the road. This is the kind of game that Georgia Tech has won several times over the past few years, at least the past 2, since Brent Key has been the coach. Like they have done well in this kind of environment. They were getting a lot of love after the Florida State game, and then now, people kind of written them off because Florida State is terrible, and the Syracuse game. So you're not getting the national love that you were just a few weeks ago. So I think that plays into their advantage. They're able to play that up usually pretty well. I think the game not being at night is kind of an underrated factor because, like, Louisville's a tough place to play. I'm not saying just because it's not at night, it doesn't mean it's a tough place to play. But Louisville games at night, even when they're not an elite team, they are tough, man. Because, like, last year, they put a beat down on Notre Dame, which many people were not expecting, and that was a night game. Like, I think it not being a night game is a little bit of a factor here. And, I do think, you can talk yourself into Louisville hasn't played anybody. I think that phrase gets overused a little bit because, again, elite teams do what Louisville did to those kind of opponents. We see it everywhere. If you're a good team, you usually dominate those kind of games. But I do think something can be said of Georgia Tech being a little bit more battle-tested and ready to go right off the bat. Louisville, this is going to be one of the better teams, or at least offenses that they've seen. And I think it could just be human nature to look past Georgia Tech and look forward to Notre Dame. I know the Notre Dame game kind of lost a little luster with them losing to Northern Illinois, but that's also a road game and a big chance for Louisville on the national stage. And then you've got Miami in a few weeks. Like, I don't know if they're taking Georgia Tech as seriously as maybe they should. I'm not saying that's the case, but I think it could be. So, again, there are some things working against me in picking Louisville. But in terms of matchups, I just think they match up well with Georgia Tech, and I think the things that they do well, I think, are just going to be a big problem for Georgia Tech. I think good passing attacks and good offensive coaches like this are just going to be a problem this year. So Louisville by a score of 34-28.
I'm going to go somewhere similar. I will say throughout this week, I've kind of grown closer to Georgia Tech winning this game. I will say my final prediction, I'm also going with Louisville. I just think there's too much to handle for Georgia Tech. I feel like Louisville brings so much, and you talked about this. The matchup, like this is a dream matchup for Louisville. Everything that Georgia Tech struggles in, especially on defense, that's what Louisville does great on their offense, and I think that matchup is probably going to be the biggest for the Cardinals. I don't think this game will be a blowout. I think if Georgia Tech wins, it's going to be a close game. If it is a blowout, I think it will be in favor of Louisville. I don't think Georgia Tech is going to win this game by 2 scores. But also looking back, that's what I said about the Florida State game in Week 1. Granted, I think Louisville's a lot better than Florida State, but I think it's possible that Louisville, not having played anybody on the level of a Power 4 team, I don't think they're going to look past Georgia Tech, but I don't think I think it's possible that they're not ramped up to the level of play that you need to have to play a Power 4 team. I think if Georgia Tech wins this game, they're going to have to start early and let that lead keep growing. I still think it'll be close by the end of the game. My final score, I'm going to go Louisville 31, Georgia Tech 28. I really don't think it'll be a bigger loss than a touchdown. But I will say there's definitely more room for Louisville to score a lot of points than there is for room for Georgia Tech to win by a lot of points.
Hey, if nothing else, people can't say that we're biased toward Georgia Tech. We try to give our honest opinion on the game and everything, and that's just what I'm saying. That's just my honest take on the game. I've been proven wrong so many times. Like I've made a lot of wrong picks before. Like I had Kansas winning the Big 12 this year, and that looks fantastic right now. So, but yeah, so that's just my honest take on the game. We will see what happens. We're just two people talking behind microphones right now. Like we'll see what happens on the field Saturday. But I know this is a lot longer than we usually go, but we try to give as in-depth preview of the game as we possibly can and try to have special guests on. Again, huge thanks to Matt for coming on. He does a great job of covering Louisville for on SI, where I work and everything, and I will be at the game, covering the game Saturday. I will not miss any more games this year. Like Syracuse was the last one. I will be here for this road trip. I'm leaving Friday morning, my first ever trip to Louisville, so I'm excited about that. I'm excited to check out the town and everything. But anything else, RJ?
I think we covered everything: offense, defense, every aspect of the game.
Yep, I think we did too. But really appreciate you guys and the support. It's been we love it. Like we really appreciate you guys and the community that we're building. We love being able to cover this team and do what we do. Like that's just something we really do enjoy doing, and we thank you guys for it because it's not possible without you guys. So if you haven't subscribed already, we would love it if you're able to. Just give us a thumbs up on that video. Hit the notification bell so you know whenever we have new content up. Follow on podcast form, 5 stars, 1 stars, whatever you think. Just leave us a comment. Just let us know what you think of the show, and we really appreciate you guys a lot. So we will be back Saturday whenever the game ends, sometime with an instant reaction. This isn't VMI. We will have an instant reaction show for you this Saturday. We will not take Saturday off this time, but we really appreciate it, guys. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you Saturday night.